Productions is here as my production assistant. He's got us going with a feed of his own. There'll be like editing and stuff with this video. Maybe we can chop out some of the horse shit. A big part of the problem last time was I had an MP4 file from Zoom, and I'm running an old Mac, so it doesn't. I can't do anything with an MP4. It has to be an MP3. Great to have you guys back out here with us. I'm not sure if this Zoom. Is there a waiting room here? Looks like participants 1. Just me so far. So, oh, we've got some people on the Facebook Live. Hey, Nick. And Nick, Ed Lavoie, Sarah Beth Langley, Gerald. Cool. All right. So we got some folks cracking away. We'll see who. There's people in the waiting room coming in. We're admitting you. Randy Sloan. I believe. Hopefully he's coming up here in a minute. We don't see you yet, Randy. If you're going to come on with video or just audio. Let me see where my volume. Hey, how you doing, buddy? Are you there? Let's see if I can get this over a little bit. So, little quick bit of cleanup from last session. I was a kind of a fuck up, and the last text I sent to Cal, my buddy Cal, we had that mix-up at the beginning of the last session. The last text I sent to him, I hadn't hit send. So I noticed it like 3 or 4 days later that the text was just sitting there, not, you know. So that was my bad. I didn't, in the scramble and everything we're trying to get done and organized, I just forgot to finish the communication with him. So I actually just had a session, a Qigong session with him a couple hours ago. And we got together to explain what had happened. He doesn't know that much about multiplicity, and he's trying to understand how sometimes I'm operating on channel D when I get some arrangements made, and then when I switch to channel B, half of that stuff doesn't follow me through. So he's figuring it out, we're figuring it out. Sometimes our communication is off. Having people around me calms me down because I feel like I've got backup and feedback off of these people. So tonight, Steve with me here is just fabulous. I don't know what else much to say. Randy, are you pretty good there? You want to check in, say hi? You're just gonna cruise? Okay. Okay. I'm getting a minimal. Let me see if I can turn my volume up here. Are you picking up his volume, his audio at all, Steve? Or
not really, no.
Okay.
Not on my camera, no.
Okay, well we'll see if it comes through in the after product. But maybe if you can get a little closer to your microphone, Randy, so we can hear you better. Right?
This should work now.
That's a little better. That's a little better. Cool.
Yeah, I was having a hard time. It's hard to hear.
I can barely hear you, buddy. Say that again.
I can't really do the video.
Okay. Well, if you're there in audio, that's great. I'm going to hit share screen here. Now I'm going to take myself out of there. I don't know. I'm not sure how... what did I do there? Okay, we're just going to leave it the way it is. So, when I get into this stuff, I was telling Steve earlier, there's a lot of kind of like blanks I have. I have these patchy ideas. I put things together. They kind of fit. There's details missing. And I'm okay with that. Like I think if I'm just shifting things a little bit and looking at it from a different perspective, opening up a new twist that maybe hadn't been considered before, my job isn't to be super complete here with a ton of ideas that are perfectly melted together. But if I can reorient a couple of things, bring in some angle. Or all that elegant, but I'll go with what I've got for you, and if you guys can fine-tune it at some point, or if there's a couple of people out there who can come along and expand on my ideas, get that stuff humming a little smoother, great. But all I'm doing, as far as I'm concerned, is shifting perspectives enough so that new patterns can kind of unfold. Again, not a sophisticated, detailed guy. I'm kind of a fast and loose, switch things, make things kind of shift and pop, and then kind of see what rumbles out from there. So I'm going to get really quickly going over some of my stuff from last time. There may be a couple of you out there watching who did not see the last video. And I want to be able to recap some of that stuff. Let's see how this is going to work. I think I've got it there on the Zoom. I believe you're seeing most of this with the Facebook Live. Okay, so let's just whip through it really quick, okay? You guys all remember the mixed nuts? The mixed nuts is your individual, right? So your individual is all packaged here with all of this stuff inside. We crack open the individual. We get the tiger bomb, your fiery person out. We get nature, your bee, or your happy, loving nature part out. Your adventure guy out, right? Your cultural, or your technological dude, who's all snappy and happy to kind of fit into, plug into different types of technology, and that's all great. Your spiritual guy. I remember what I said about spirituality. We're all kind of like dumplings in the same soup. It's not that complex if you look at it in the basic form. Spirit is air, right? So we're all breathing, exchanging air. It's all going in and out of all of us. So the more finer spiritual traditions and what I call an individual spiritual tradition are beautiful. There's a lot of gorgeous stuff going on there. But it relies on certain people's ego states or confined ideas about things in order to operate. So that's there. We have our tape, which is the that patch you up, look after you kind of personality that tries to make everybody happy and does a good job most of the time, but sometimes is overdoing it. We have our Zip Fizz guy here. We just lost nature right off the side of the cliff. That's a bad deal. Nature here is Zip Fizz is your I don't know, I hope I'm going to get some money from these Zip Fizz guys at some point. They're going to donate to my DTube channel once I get it up and running. But yeah, to get this is your career guy, your very driven sort of person with some kind of a specialty that's contributing to society through their job or their vocation. This one got a good laugh last time. This is our whiteout. And I don't want to give white people a hard time. it seems like maybe I'm picking on a certain race. I'm not. I'm just using whiteout as kind of like a good example of what's happening with certain cultures who want to dominate. And you know, if this was another world in another dimension, and you know, throughout the third world, we had white people, and there were either yellow people or black people or brown people populating the first world, right? The Western world, whatever you want to call it. These roles might be reversed, right? So I don't necessarily think anybody's doing a bad job. They're doing what I think is driven for what they see as their main interests. And of course, again, this is kind of an ego state or an individual component of society or of what we are. And that's fine. We need individual components. Okay? When we get back in to the bottom of the bucket, you can't get that stuff out, right? It's stuck in there. And you all remember how it's stuck in there. We have technology. Good thing I got the backup tonight. We have our trauma, the part of us that's all wound up really tight, and it's a tape measure. So that trauma, once you pull it out of there and you start to measure what you're dealing with, and you can figure stuff out and get yourself more packaged, more loose, more flexible, and having a good range of motion, right? Just like a muscle. If you're all cramped up and you're tense, your body's tense with holding all this trauma, that's not a good state of being. So the more you can move things around, examine things, twist things, open stuff up, the easier this gets to be part of your scene, right? And I like to say scars add character. So the idea that you have trauma is not a bad idea. Everybody has some, and you're gonna just sort of like learn to work with it in a different pattern, right? We're still kind of stuck in here. I mean, it's moving a little bit, right? We're getting that seed of consciousness poking out for us, which is great. But there's something else that's kind of jamming it up in there. And what that is, and I didn't have it last time, is a book. And the book is whatever book you want to call this. It doesn't really matter, right? It's a text or a finite expression that may have several different interpretations, but it was written with a purpose in mind, and so that purpose generally is carried forward or expanded upon. So books are great. I'm coming out with one, but they are to be taken in their time as a reference or as a journal to capture where we're at, right? And this can also be science, and I'm giving science a hard time in this talk tonight, not because science is bad, but because it has a lack of range of motion. It has a drive that has gotten a little unbalanced in certain ways. So I'll get into that in a few minutes. But you know, the book is new for tonight. We didn't have it on our last presentation, but whoever's, you know, buy the book, someone very, very like orderly and what's the word I'm looking for? Bureaucratically minded will love sticking to the book, right? And the book is okay, it's great, it's got a purpose, but it's not the big cheese. So the big cheese is our seed of consciousness. This is immutable, it's everything. It's our link, if you want to call it our interface with everything, and we all have one of these, and it's indestructible, it's perfect, it's pure and perfect spirit. We can call it, like if we're doing internal family systems, we can call it the self. We can call it the Atman or the Buddha nature, if we're going with Eastern religions. The soul is a big Western idea. There's there's a balance, right? There's a balance between this, which is the opening, and the rest of your confined states of being. So I'll go over it again with you really quick here. What we're doing in our present configuration is we're focused on that confinement in our individual, right? So we're focused on that, and that individual will do things for us. It's necessary. It doesn't need to go anywhere. It's just fine the way it is, basically, right? The thing that we're missing is, in that repetitive movement, is the individual and then the opening to our indivisible. And I call this our indivisible because mathematically it works. Like this can't be divided, it can't be destroyed, it's immutable. Okay? So there's a lot of scientific ideas out there about entropy and chaos theory, and there's a lot of stuff out there that suggests that there's cause and effect, a wear down, a downward spiral, right? And we're all feeling this downward spiral right now. We're all feeling this kind of like, whoa, this is kind of crazy. We don't seem to be very stable. Things are very unhinged right now. And that is mainly because we're only focused on the confinement in our individual. So our individual confinement is susceptible to the downward spiral. It is susceptible to causation and sort of like a drive idea that is unbalanced. But if we take our confined individual in that repetitive motion that goes to opening, and if we stop using this blinder, okay, and what I suggest is meditation or some sort of mindfulness practice where you back away a little bit from your focus on your individual. So you're softening out and you're coming more aware, more having a global or a more universal awareness. And then you can see over here, you can see that opening to your indivisible. And then the confinement in your individual, the opening to your indivisible, the confinement, the opening, the confinement, the opening. Whereas if you're just focused on your individual, you're missing that, because you'll go over and open, but you won't see it because there's this blinder here. Okay? So what we're doing in Western society in particular is focusing mainly on the individual, which is a good stage. I think of it more like adolescence, where you're like totally self-centered and really about, getting out in the world and being established and finding your agency and everything. So the individual is important. I don't negate anything if I can help it, okay? I might get a little testy or a little mean at times and negate something or somebody. I don't mean to. It's not my best presentation or most complete presentation. So if I can get away from negating things, there's a couple of things maybe that are exceptions to the rule that you can negate if you really need to. And there's certain conditions where negating something and just focusing on one thing is necessary. But generally, negation limits you, confines you, okay? And this, if you want to call this negation, that's your negation gate or your blinder, right? So what I'm doing here with the individual being so focused on it is I'm missing half of our movement. And what I can't remember, Steve, what the hell was that stuff I was talking about in the last video? It wasn't regeneration, it was the recurrence. This is the recurrent movement that's always going on. And there's different types of patterns or different types of movements that you can see with the recurrence. So in other words, I'm doing this right? And everybody's kind of putting in their head, okay, there's a confinement, and then there's an opening. There's a confinement, and then there's an opening. And then there's a confinement, and then there's an opening. And that's one way of looking at it. That's kind of like one little way. There's also a twisting and an untwisting, and a twisting and an untwisting, and a twisting and an untwisting. You know, you can take these recurrences and give them different dynamics or different states of flow, and they all still show you a pattern of duality or paradox that take you out of one position. So in other words, being in one position, being finite, being confined, has a utility, but it also has a constraint. So learning that there's that infinite opening, untwisting, you start to get the flow of nature, the flow of science a little bit better. And I'm like I say, I'm going to be missing some stuff. There's a real easy, very straightforward, I find predictable way of poking holes in people who talk like me or who get a little woo-woo at times, because what you're doing is you're saying, oh yeah, but we can't measure that other stuff, right? So we have to, if we can't measure it, then it doesn't factor into our data. And you know, if you look at all the religions around the world, all kind of like involved in this intense worship or ethic of a greater presence, that to me is a scientific phenomena of something else. I'm not going to get into too much squabbling back and forth between having a spiritual ethic and having an atheist or anti-theist ethic. To say that you're against organized religion makes sense in a lot of ways. Like I'm not crazy about a lot of their features, but to say that there's a beauty and a passion for that opening is sustaining force in the world is a very beautiful thing. So, you know, everybody's valid. I want to impress this upon you as much as possible. If you think the earth is flat, you're valid. When people fight against people who think the earth is flat, what they don't consider is, if we've got all these balls lined up in a parallel universe, and there's one Earth, two Earth, three Earth, four Earth, and goes way the hell that way. If you're standing here and you're sensing the Earth, and you look across and you're sensing the Earth and the Earth and the Earth and the Earth and the Earth, you know, now to you in your mind and whatever pattern it is you're playing with your brain on, the Earth is flat. Or we can say cylindrical, right? So one aspect or one stripe on that cylindrical object in that parallel universe gives us a flat Earth. Now, I know you're going to, you know, throw up a picture from space and show one planet, and that's okay. We have the external universe that's projected, and then our internal universe. And if you order your internal universe a little bit differently to think the Earth is flat, you're fine. It's the incompatibility of things is a sticking point for some people, and what I like is the variability of things. More potential for dynamic operations recognizing our variability. Certainly, when we get into holding a pattern, that's productive in a lot of ways too. But if we can open up to our variability, and certainly all these ego states, or what I have are alters, what you might say in internal family systems or IFS would call these parts, and they'd have different names like firefighters or exiles or whatever in IFS, and then we'd be calling them protectors or trauma holders in more of the esoteric dissociative language. There's just all these different floating levels out there that if we get a little more comfortable with the unusual patterns of them, we can see a little bit more broadly. And what's happening when you unpack your individual and lay out all of your guys here, these individual ego states in an organized pattern can make room for our indivisible. And so our indivisible is no longer confined in our individual. We're not packing it away, stuffing it down there with all of these ego states. We're opening the ego states, giving them some sort of like agency, validity, some ways of opening themselves and counterbalancing one another, even if they're opposed to each other in certain ways. They all have validity. They all have a ring of agency, a ring of being, where they can hold space for the indivisible. And that indivisible, once it's up and operational, it's always operational, it's always up. But once we have more awareness of it, our gate, right, the individual here, the indivisible over here that we don't see, only focused on our individual, when we can step back or switch the gate a little bit and see our indivisible, we're better balanced. And we're able to proceed or elevate our game a little bit. So that's a recap from the last session, including the book. And the book can be science, it can be religion, it can be, you know, any book you want. Tonight I'm going to bounce back and forth a little bit between the will and science. It's a screwy talk because the patterns for these kinds of ideas mainly have lived in my head for decades, and I'm not used to talking about this stuff. So if there's holes in any of it and you think, well, you know, he didn't really cover this very well, I know. I'm not giving you a Golden Gate Bridge here. I'm putting a couple of big columns in the middle of that gap, and I'm stringing some wire, and then it's up to a lot of other people to take that suspension and put the undercarriage of the actual structure in place, right? So I'm not the guy that's going A to Z on everything. I'm just giving you A, K, Q, and Y. And then you guys have to fit in a bunch of that other stuff to give us a full range, broad spectrum, alphabetical structure, okay? Again, this is what I do. I think in very broad terms, very wide concept. I don't have a lot of connecting pieces, but we'll talk about that as well in my presentation. So for tonight, we're going to get into, I'm going to show you my storyboard here. I don't know how well you guys can see it. That's kind of like my quickie outline for this evening. And I'm just going to lay it down here, and I'm going to go through it with you guys as best I can. What is, we've covered the fact that opening is our indivisible, confinement is our individual, okay? So we can play on that recurrence. To say that free will, and I'll just jump right in with free will, to say that free will is non-existent is, from certain angles, correct. When you have your blinders up and you are focused on the individual, and that is a confined state of awareness, you can pretty well argue that, yeah, there is no free will. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that analogy. I'm fine with that matchup. Now, to say, and this is not me making the final word on this, I'm just saying at the confined stage, yeah, you could argue pretty successfully that there's no free will. I'm okay with that. If you look at the infinite, and I'll touch on the infinite in another talk, okay? Because that's a big fucking subject area. Let's just crack ourselves up for a minute here. But that infinity prospect has some other features or some other questions or stretches that can orient us differently as well. And I'll get into that, do an infinity talk on another night. And that'll probably even be a short one if we're lucky. So the infinite means every possibility that you can think of is out there, right? So right there, just from the standpoint of infinity, of course we have free will. right? You would have everything in your infinity package. Does that make sense to everybody? I mean, I'm just trying to lay it out there real simply for starters. So now you've got free will because infinity dictates that everything is out there. And so there's your free will. It's off in the corner, hiding, whatever, right? To say that there are different types of will, to say that you have a like a forceful will or a reactive will, or different types of like what we did when we called all evil towards us is we purposefully given ourselves a zero option type of will, where our will is no longer what we personally track with. Like, we've given over our will to a larger purpose, and so to say that we're kicking evil's ass is incorrect. What we've done is we've come to see that continuum of evil good, reliable, unreliable, or juxtaposed reliable, unreliable the other way. So, and I'll get into some of that drivetrain variability with you guys in a bit. But will is you can exercise free will. It isn't something you do very well or at all as an individual, like a lot. So it's easy to say as your individual, you are without much will. Your culture or your upbringing, your circumstances are dictating the choices you make or the patterns you follow. So you've given up will, or you've given up agency. And then as you're indivisible, you're everything. Being everything means that we can drop things like causation. There is no pattern that doesn't work in everything, because you're everything, right? So free will in everything is variable. You can play with it. You can move it around. It's there for you to explore. It's there for you to have like a certain access to, if you soft enough with it. You can't kind of reach and grab the freedom. It doesn't work to be grabby or demanding of things. You go back, that's your individual state, your confinement. When you open, right? And so you're open, and now you have this opening to everything. So you're going to be, with your indivisible, available or having access to whatever will. Basically, you're doing whatever the fuck you feel like doing, whenever the fuck you feel like doing. That's this guy, okay? And that's not to say, okay, we're going to jump into that and just go nuts with it. You're in that recurrence where you are confining yourself as your individual at times and opening to your indivisible. Confinement, opening, confinement, opening. The balance of those two things are what brings us further expression, further expansion, okay? So that covers free will. Like, I don't know that we have any questions here. I don't see anybody in the waiting room, I don't think. I mean, I'm hoping I've explained that decently enough that there aren't any fucking questions. I mean, you can have questions about this stuff and you can challenge me on it, and I'm just going to look at you and say, okay, you're right. To argue with you and negate your perspective or your point of view does me very little juice. It basically, what I'm doing with that is I'm looking at it and I'm saying to myself, I'm not going to negate this guy or this lady. You know, you want to tell me that technology is the answer to everything, and you know we have to pursue our scientific.
Question.
Yeah, okay, just a sec. But you're going to wind up, you know, convincing you and a couple of million of your buddies that this perspective that you have is correct, and that's great, right? I mean, I don't have a problem with people being confined in their individual perspectives. That's a part of your nature, but it's also a part of your nature to open to everything and confine and open and confine and open. But if all you're doing is confining, okay, I mean, that's, you know, free will. You have the free will to have no will. Okay, so go ahead. What was your question, Steve?
So earlier we were talking about accepting other people's reality even though it doesn't make sense, and you specifically talked about the flat earth.
Right, right.
And I was having this conversation with somebody, a good friend of mine the other day, and we were talking about what I was perceiving as ultimate truth. Can't we all agree that the world is round? And she said, no, you can't.
Right.
And I'm having a hard time getting to that space, and how can we get to that?
That's a function of your attachment to certainty, right? So certainty, which is basically one of the big goals of science, is to say we're going to test the shit out of something and we're going to verify that this pattern that we've predicted, this theory that we have in place, is verifiable. And once we verify it and test it in different ways and it holds up, then we say, we have truth.
The truth.
Right? Okay. What you have is what I call a proximal truth. Okay? So when we're talking about proximal and distal in anatomy, the elbow is proximal to my body. My heart is my center. You know, the different vortexes or different spins in your body, whatever you want to call it. But we can all say pretty confidently, you know, our heart is our center. Let's just go with that. Don't argue with me. It'll make it fucky, and I don't, you know, I'm not really in the mood to argue these finer points. Just hear what I'm saying and accept that our heart is our center. So at our center, we are the most proximal to what's happening in our experience, in our sphere. So the more proximal your truth, and that is, for a lot of us, our families, right? If your family is in your heart, if you have people you're close to, they're in your heart, that's what you hold on to above all else, right? You will keep those people in your heart, and that will be your truth. Now, aside from the heart business, if you have someone on your shoulder, they are more distal. They are not proximal to you anymore, or as centered on you. So they're distal or distant. So distant out on your shoulder, more distant out at your elbow, more distant at your wrist. Your fingertips are really like way out there, you know, very, very distal to your center truth, right? So when someone says the world is flat and I can sense it in my fingertips, and you say, hey, bullshit, buddy, the world is round and I can sense it in my heart or my shoulder, my core, my trunk has a sense of the roundness of things, right? Why are you both right? You're both right because when you put your feelers out to sense something as truth, and there's a saying, I think Neil deGrasse Tyson years ago had a great meme out there that said, you know, there is only truth in the multiverse, right? So when you take the multiverse, the infinite, everything's valid. Everything occurs. There are no negations in the multiverse. In our widest concept ideas of what's out there, negation doesn't exist. You can't say, oh, there isn't that. No, I'm sorry, everything's infinite, there's everything, right? So when the guy with the fingertip idea that the world is flat pisses you off, it's because you have a core sense that the world is round. And you're both right. He just has a more distal truth, and you have a more proximal truth. And they're both truths, they're just different ends.
But
and
to
this,
him, his truth is.
he's sensing things at a distance,
Oh.
right? He's wired in his internal universe or her internal universe to sense the distant or the idea that's around a corner, that's not seen, that's not observed, and he says the world is flat. I personally like a round Earth. You know, it works for a lot of our physics and stuff. But if you think of the flat Earth, if we started to really work with our distal awareness and said, okay, now we have a flat Earth at times, right? Remember, eternal recurrence. So you're confined, you're open. You're confined, you're open. So this opening where we can have a flat Earth if we want one, if it's going to suit our purposes for a while, right? We go to the flat Earth idea. I don't mind doing that. I'm more accustomed to the round Earth idea in my confinement or in my individual. But if I have to stretch my perception and open myself to everything, which, by the way, is what this is, it's opening to everything. Sure, we can do a flat Earth. I know that this grates people like fucking crazy. Like, there are probably, you know, however many people watching, let's say 50, 100, 500, 1,000, whatever. These 1,000 people that are watching, 974 of them right now have, like, ratcheted up rectal pressure hearing me say, yeah, we can have a flat Earth, right? Because it's like, whoa, the Earth is round. We've been conditioned to look at ourselves as an individual in a confinement. And the round Earth story is what's been present here for a long, long time. So we're holding to that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if we're going to enter the 21st century and have new, broader ideas of ourselves and progress as a species, we can consider that opening, that distal reality, to be valid as well. It may not be proximal and comfortable for us, but it's distal and valid when you stretch for it. Okay? Everything is possible. So to say, oh, we're limited by gravity, right? Everybody likes to bring up gravity when you talk about infinity or, you know, the most open concept ideas, and everybody says, oh no, gravity's, you know, real. And I can do a talk on gravity and infinity maybe together. We'll mash those two concepts up. Remind me later, and we'll do something like, you know, next time around. But gravity is not a big deal. Everybody thinks it's a big deal. It's a law of nature. I get it. You go flat Earth, you start to spin things a little bit differently, you get a little bit lighter, you're shaped more like a wing than a ball, right? A ball just drops. A wing, if you get some air current around it, it can float, it can do things, it can shift. So changing the dynamics of gravity, changing the theory of relativity, if the theory of relativity holds up the way it does, and it's beautiful, right? Everybody's happy. There's been something out maybe in the last 5 or 10 years where they've decided that the speed of light is not really the actual fast, high-end speed that you can go. I mean, the speed of light was always considered a constant, that's as fast as you can go. And now, don't ask me what the particulars on it, because I read something maybe 4 years ago about how that speed of light now has been questioned and we can go faster than the speed of light. And these guys with the what do you call those?
Switzerland.
Yeah, the
Cylinder.
Yeah.
Collider or something.
Yeah, Hadron Collider. So they're whizzing shit around and they're breaking stuff up, testing stuff, you know, retesting all these different hypotheses are coming out. It's great, right? Knock yourselves out with that shit. I mean, it's a fun way to spend an afternoon, right? But it doesn't get me out of bed in the morning. What gets me out of bed in the morning is everything, right? If I can go to my indivisible reliably as a confined individual and open to my indivisible and confine and open and confine and open, over here when I'm open and when I really get the hang of this, do I need miles and miles of circular tunnel in Switzerland or China? to smash shit into each other. Again, we're looking at a causation type of event in those kinds of experiments, thinking that something causes something else. And if you start to really get with your indivisible, it's not such a big deal to think in terms of, well, if this, then that. Right? You soften out away from the confinement of causation. So your indivisible high is your ticket to ride. You're going to get so much further by opening your consciousness than you are by experimenting in science. And science is great. I don't have a problem with it. It's a method of verification. It has like a book, it has a relevance for its time and its place in how we journal or predict or say, okay, we're finding this proximal truth at the shoulder of our species that we didn't know was there before, and that explains why we can fully articulate our shoulder, and so now we're happier about, you know, doing this or trying this or moving in this direction with a certain technology. I don't have a problem with us levitating by the end of this century. I don't have a problem with us correcting global warming, you know, just turning the thermostat down on the Earth. If we can take what's available to us in our indivisible with what the journal is telling us is a problem and shift things around a little bit, right? So gravity, big obstacle for a lot of people. The reason we're not levitating, is the same reason we're not flying, right? In flying, levitation, you could say it's all the same thing. About 100 years ago, the Wright brothers came along after tons and tons of refinement. Da Vinci, I think it was in the 1600s or 1400s, was drawing these helicopter apparatuses that would be a flying machine, and then people just had it in their head for centuries. You know, well, what if we can fly? What if we can fly? What if we can get a machine together that can fly? And so many people were like, oh my God, you're so full of shit. Just get off of this flying stuff. It's never going to fucking happen. Right? So eventually, a certain percentage of our population held this idea for long enough that we sort of manifest the opening without realizing it. We, you know, have our blinders on to the fact that we're confined and we're static, but every few hundred times a second that we're doing this little sort of crack opens in our awareness where we can see this opening, or this possibility, right? But it was closed before because nobody's ever flown. Birds fly, but man doesn't fly. Man is a species that walked, even though it was a species that swam for so long. Now it's a species that walk, and that's all it's going to ever do, right? So now we're flying, and everybody's like, holy shit, I would have never guessed this a couple hundred years ago. So what's happened is, somewhere 100 years ago, we got to a critical mass of availability and that little gap in our blinder to say, well, there's a potential to fly, right? And so now we're you know, having breakfast in New York and supper in Paris, right? So the idea that we can fly is astounding 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago. No one would have, people would have strung you up and or, you know, put you in a water or burned you at the stake, and you know, if you float, you're a witch, and just all this superstitious idea about the confined nature of man or women creates a inertia. Okay, and I want to talk about inertia real quick. Inertia is great, right? What we have with depression, with over-identifying with our individual, with static ideas in science, with bureaucracy, that's all just inertia. We're all just kind of stuck in a system of confinement. And that's a beautiful thing, to slow down and say, this is my place. This is where I'm going to build my house. This is how I'm going to structure my society, my culture, my tribe, whatever. But the inertia of doing that creates a sort of stuckness. And that stuckness, you know, it's okay. Again, confinement, openness, several hundred times a second. I used the word last time that we are reincarnating several hundred times a second. And you know, that gets a little bit of fucking eyebrows raised because everybody's like, well, what do you mean we're reincarnating? The way our molecules spin, the way our atoms, the way everything sort of energy sort of floats and wobbles in our system, we are presenting ourselves static, confined, open, static, confined, open, static, confined, open, static, confined. You know, it's just like, so we are here in a pattern of recurrence, presenting, and we do it with inertia. So we look like, I look like the same guy that started this video, right? Whereas if I was in the 1700s, walking around everywhere, and the whole entire population of the earth agreed that walking was your only, or you know, riding on a horse or whatever, but what land-based travel was, or by sea, was your only two forms of travel that were, you know, doable, right? And if I stuck with that inertia of those ideas, we'd all still be landlocked, or you know, maybe, I don't know. You get where I'm going with this, right? It's the inertia of your confinement that keeps a pattern of awareness or pattern of operations in place. So in other words, when you let go of the inertia, when you find some way to break yourself out of the inertia, and this is where going a little fucking crazy comes in really handy, you destroy or you disrupt your patterns enough so that you must proceed into a different area of awareness. And for a lot of people, you know, losing your mind once or twice and having, you know, being fucking shoveled all these medications on you, and now you're kind of walking around in a stupor with a kind of a chemical lobotomy for the rest of your life, you are back in that confined space of let's stay with our inertia, right? And that inertia is okay. I mean, it's a choice. You have the will, you have the free will to choose inertia and remain stuck. I don't argue with that. If that's your scene, fucking great. But, like I say, 21st century, we're almost 21 years into the 21st century. What about some new shit? Why don't we expand our ideas a little bit and see where we go with things? So this idea to be open, at the same time we're closed, individual, indivisible, individual, indivisible, individual, indivisible. These are getting a feel for this. Losing some of that inertia means we are going to levitate. We are going to turn global warming around. I think, personally, and this is just like me shooting from the hip, because I've thought, oh man, this global warming shit, how the fuck are we going to fix that? You know, everybody's going to fucking laugh, right? But I think 4 or 5 galaxies from here, there's a oscillating or a semi-unbalanced galaxy that we either need to unbalance a little more or straighten out and smooth out a little bit, and we'll find a way of channeling large energy fields or rebalancing our galaxy, or rebalancing certain planets in certain ways that give us the ability to, whatever, refreeze the poles, distance the sun a little bit, take some factor and just give it a little tweak and bring our temperature back down into a decent range. You're all going to say, holy shit, that guy's crazy. I am fucking crazy. I do not function within a inertia-bound pattern of behavior. I'm more about variability. I like the ideas, the float, the flow. So, yeah, if you can go with someone who's a little bit broader minded or a little bit looser packaged, and you can sort of stomach the fact that, holy fuck, this guy's kind of crazy, but he's got some interesting ideas, then, you know, if I'm up your alley and you're digging it, great. If you're stuck, if you really have like a giant stick up your ass and you're like, oh no, I'm rigidly focused on science and the confinement of our species, that's okay too. I don't mind. It takes all kinds, right? So if you're going to be an individual driven, confinement fetished person, great. You're going to figure some stuff out that I'm not going to figure out because I'm floating all over the fucking place. But while you're confined and while you're working on the stuff that confinement treats you with, I'll open and I'll look around at different things, and maybe together we get together for lunch one day and you're telling me about your confinement problems and I'm saying, well, I've been open here for a while and what about this, right? And so I help you, but I can't help you. I can't factor what all of this open shit is, why it's useful or why it has an application, unless I understand your confinement. So it's just as important to be confined in your indivisible as it is open in your indivisible. And certain people will be both very easily. More people might be confined for another century or two because that's the way we've been for so long. But once you open, once more people open, that balance happens, the lift can happen, right? So the last session we did, the last Zoom number 1, I covered that sort of how we balance out and how we kind of elevate our game. I don't know, how are we doing on time here?
We're an hour in.
We're an hour in. So I'm gonna go 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours. We'll see where things land here in the next little while. I want to show you something that's really, really fucking cool. Okay? So I've been talking about you're indivisible, right? And everybody's like, oh, fuck, I didn't know I had one of those. Well, you have one, and it's very clear when you're a baby, right? This is a smaller bucket. You're indivisible with, look, very little ego state build up in there, right? So it's like no separation. It's indivisible. When you're 17, 20, 22 inches long and you're a newborn, you have no concept of, like, we build all of this other shit onto you with our cultural conditioning, with our biological constructs, like our you know, we say, hey, don't just fucking lay around hanging out all day, you know, get a job. And so, you know, this guy's eventually gonna be all of this shit, which is okay, right? It's a pattern of growth. But if we could take this baby and say, okay, no real ego clutter, right? Just indivisible. What I want to tell you is, from what my experience of my plurality is, and I have breaks early enough, right at 2 months and 4 months, that I have these very young alters, an awareness of myself in a very young state, without the ego clutter, that being, just being, B-E-I-N-G, being, is bulletproof. If you can just be, you know, the shit just comes to you. I mean, I know, like, the accountants out there are going to say, well, don't know, you've got to be out there working and have a job and stuff like that. 70 or 80% of the shit that we're doing is fucking redundant and useless. It's just make work to generate some kind of commerce, right? If we just were more being and less fucking running around doing like chickens with our heads cut off, we'd be fine, you know, and we'd have a lot of this shit figured out. We'd levitate, you know, to Tonga for the afternoon, right? And then be back in Hawaii for lunch or for dinner. There's just this immeasurable openness that's available to us without all the ego clutter. So babies being indivisible, mostly or all indivisibility, pretty fucking cool. Get with your inner child, get with whatever it is that takes you down into your simplest form. That playfulness, that joy, that simplicity, it's like I say, being is bulletproof. There's no other pattern that I'm aware of that we already are, right? We already have the experience of our babies in our back pocket. We just have cluttered them up with all kinds of other shit. So when I say that we have a let me put it to you another way, right? I'm a nurse, right? So I was in this motorcycle accident. I have this bad compression area in my neck at C3, C4, where I got a pinched nerve. And I've got low back problems. I fucked my back up a couple times over the years, lifting patients and doing construction work and all of this, heavy lifting kind of stuff. So in today's cutting edge science, we can, there was a Joe Rogan out I don't know, a year ago maybe, or a little longer, with Mel Gibson and some doctor that was a guy from Texas who had a clinic in Panama. And the Panama clinic was able to do stem cell injections into these different areas of your body, your spine, let's say. So when we inject your spine at an area of degeneration or injury with stem cells, all those stem cells go to work to repair this area, right? And this, I don't know what this costs. I think it's like, if I had to go down there to Panama and do this procedure, I think I'd need like 60 or 70 grand. I'm not sure exactly. And it's the closer to the injury you can do it, like the guys with spinal cord injuries that have the means to go to these areas and get these injections, their recovery from the spinal cord injury 2 years, 3 years later is like fucking phenomenal, right? Some of these guys are actually walking now, where before we'd say, okay, that's it, you're paraplegic or quadriplegic. So the technique of harvesting stem cells and then injecting them into traumatic areas is one way to go. The way I go, and I'm again, you're going to think, well, this guy's fucking crazy. The way I go is, what if I spend more time in my baby awareness, right? You take your average newborn to 2, 3, 5-year-old kid, and they've got something like, don't quote me here, okay? But I think they've got something like 400 or 500 times more stem cells floating around in their body than once you hit teenage years, early 20s, it really starts to taper off. And once you get into your 30s and 40s, everything really slows down. So you're, a guy at my age, I'm circulating 10% or less of the stem cells in my body. They have to, if they're going to harvest mine, they got to go into a big bone like my pelvis to find bone marrow with enough stem cells to use to try to regenerate certain tissues in different parts of my body. But if I go into my baby once in a while or regularly, and I'm just being, that state of being is swimming in stem cells, right? So you want to talk healing, it's available to you if you can access your state of being, your simplicity, your infant, younger, pure position in your expanded ego states. I don't see why we have disease, except that we're very, very interested in curing it. And the more you're trying to cure something, like manipulate something, right? You're looking at something in a confined state, so it needs to be fixed. We need to work on this because we want to open this up and we want to, use science and do all this shit to make things better, right? Meanwhile, we're over here, we're perfect. So come to your indivisible, especially in your younger, gentler, purer states. Like the fountain of youth is within all of us, if you think about it. Get that shit rolling. You're not going to be all hunched over, 90-year-old, bent up, crippled up with arthritis anymore, because you're also a 3-year-old or a 3-month-old. Spend some time being. Being is bulletproof. That will bring around that richness of being, that openness to your stem cell circulation that you don't even think you have. Like there are a couple of us that have excellent vision. Like if I'm in a certain pattern where I'm working on something and I can see, don't need my reading glasses, I'm like, okay, whoever's kicking it right now sees like a fucking hawk, right? But then later on I'll be a little muddled, or I'll be in a rush and I'll be more mixed, more blended, and I look at my phone or a page and I can't read shit, I gotta put my reading glasses on. So these different states of being, this multiplicity has much more potential to give us a broader footprint in our health and vitality than we know what to do with, right? We all want to treat ourselves along an aging continuum, and now you're a geriatric, and yeah, you're going to be fucked up, and if a little virus comes along and kills you, sorry. There's no reason for 90% of the shit we're doing out there in these models of disease. We are confined in our individual thinking of ourselves as separate from everybody else, needing to patch ourselves up with certain cause and effect transactions, when really, take away the causation, take away the separateness, open to your indivisible, you're going to feel a lot better. I can tell you that from experience. Like I've lived as someone who's been miserable a lot of my life, and getting into that indivisible awareness has broadened my footing and made me a little more vital. So I sidestepped there. I jumped off of the science free will thing and I got into the baby stuff with the health picture, just because that felt like a good way to go. Let me talk to you for a few minutes about spin. And when I say spin, I don't mean really fine points in quantum entanglement, or I'm just going with the basics, right? So if we look at this chair here, I took the back off this chair. I don't know how well we can see. Can you come around, Steve, and just check my angles on some of these cameras now that I'm moving things around? And see if you can help me out with this. I think I may need to adjust things out a bit. I can also bring this chair up. I think I can do that. So this is a swivel chair with its back off. I took the back off a couple of days ago when I was playing around with the idea of spinning things around. We got that.
I got it.
So I had you guys look at alternating current and regenerative braking in electric vehicles. to complement our discussion of science and free will. So when we're spinning this thing, when I'm pushing on the handles, I'm driving it, right? I'm putting, let's say, an electric current with a certain polarity and a certain magnetism or induction arrangement to drive this in a certain direction. And then when I want to slow it down, I'm slowing it down by either, like, you know, on the brakes in most people's cars, on motorcycles, whatever, are disc brakes, so we're mechanically grabbing a disc and slowing the car down. But in the case of regenerative braking in electric vehicles, we're just switching the polarity arrangement. The slowdown on the that inertia, that movement that is, you know, 40 miles an hour, slowing yourself down to 10 miles an hour. You use reverse polarity, a different induction. Again, like the super fine technical aspects of what I'm talking about, using the exact right words. I'm not doing that, but we are. If you look at a 5, 6, 7 minute video on how regenerative braking works on YouTube, you'll see that we're taking that momentum that we have with the car at 40 miles an hour, and as we slow it down, we're generating power back into the batteries. So the batteries are putting out an electrical charge and driving the motor to bring the car from 10 miles an hour up to 40 miles an hour. And then when we slow it down, we're reversing that, and the slowdown of the car now generates power to put back into the batteries, right? The confinement, openness, confinement, openness, confinement, openness is that recurrence. That twisting and untwisting, twisting and untwisting is a recurrence, right? So what we're doing basically with regenerative power is we are driving it in one direction, and then in the opposite direction, it's twisted back into us to create more of an energy capture. So the way I see science, and this is, you know, again, a little fast and loose. Don't worry that I'm not being, you know, too perfect with stuff. But science is a driver, right? We're driving, we're driving, we're driving. We're trying to open our universe. We're expanding our awareness. We're doing these experiments to verify certain things so we can move on to a next stage, a next level, whatever. So that's driving, driving, driving in one direction. Lacks, because we're so balanced and we're so confined in the individual and material awareness. Materialism is a, you know, a construct where, you know, you've got this little piece of material, atom, molecule, whatever, and it reacts or it binds with another part, you know. It's a building block kind of idea of how the world works, instead of a kind of a flow of sort of light particles. And when you get into the quantum physics and the particle physics and the astrophysics even, I guess, there's all these ideas out there that you know, everything is just everything, and we're just kind of like there and we're observing it. But the idea that we're observing it instead of intrinsic to it escapes us. So we stick with the material idea that we're observers and therefore separate from what's happening out there. But if you take the idea that we're not driving so much to figure stuff out, right? We're also on that movement. We're twisting and untwisting, twisting and untwisting, twisting and untwisting. So if we can consider that untwisting, right? The twisting is the science, or the twisting is the drive to find ourselves. The untwisting is, you're already here, right? You're already, this is you, this is everything. You're just missing part of it because you're driving so fucking hard at shit. So the regenerative braking in everything, consciousness, nature, whatever you want to say, is starting to, science has been running up against this wall of, you know, since the split, what the hell do they call that? The split light experiment or split screen experiment?
Oh, split screen.
The photon thing, where they observe a photon and it travels in one distinct direction, and then they stop looking at it, and it fucking does whatever it wants.
Double slit experiment.
Yeah.
Like,
So science is bouncing into this idea that we are intrinsic to our environment. We have this, we're twisting for stuff, but there's this untwisting, and we don't quite understand what the other part of that is. And I've been showing you that with the confinement opening. So we need to focus more on our indivisible, the non-duality in nature. Duality exists within nature because the same way free will exists within nature, because of infinity, because everything's there, right? So to say that you have a non-duality, a strict non-duality, is almost the same as saying we're confined to being everything, which is a type of confinement. So to say that there's a duality within non-duality, and we can play with that, we can twist into it, we can untwist, twist, untwist. That makes us a little more fluid and a little more available to a broader style of operations. So when you take your individual, okay, and you twist and you drive for something, there's a kind of a resistance, right? And you reach or you grasp for something, and then you have to relax, and then you're reaching and grasping, you have to relax. So that twisting untwists with a regenerative or with a equal and opposite force, you know, whatever those physical material science types of ideas are, right? So every reaction has an equal and opposite reaction. In your individual science geared ideas that drive you forward, that drive you, and so you're twisting, you're untwisting, you're twisting, you're untwisting, you're fighting all of this shit. With the individual, you have that paradox or that dichotomy, that duality within the non-duality that's sticky at times, and you run up against these barriers and you find yourself unhappy, for lack of a better word. You keep doing these experiments, and I love the guys in science who say, you know, the more we know, the more we figure out, the more we realize we don't know, and that is very much like a dog chasing its tail, right? So it's okay with me to be in that pattern of individual confinement, trying to work out your patterns or your layers. There's a lot of utility in this stuff. And to do it from the individual angle yields certain issues. Like I said, if you're open, and that's all you are is open, you're just hanging out, you're not doing anything. But if you're confined every once in a while, and the confinement creates a situation that you're going to try to work on, or you're going to, you know, enjoy some sort of challenge with, then the open part of you will look and go, well, okay, oh, you've got a confinement there. Oh, I think I've got something for you. We'll do this. And you know, so that's the play, that's the back and forth, right? Now, I want to stress with you that this indivisible, at its expression, at its arc or its moment, has no regenerative aspect to it. There is no breaking, right? Like, this thing doesn't have any breaks. It doesn't have any breaks because why would you be worried about running into things or colliding with different things if you're everything? You don't need, you have that state of being, that state of equanimity as you're indivisible. So the fight that you constantly work at with science is a fun fight. It's an interesting exercise, but just being is bulletproof. The point, the emphasis I want to make with you here is, without the need to break, right? You open, you expand. So you are no longer fighting. So when you find yourself no longer fighting, to try and figure shit out when you just are. No need for breaking. No limits. No driving, twisting, fighting shit anymore. You're just everything. So science, when it's done badly or when people come up with sort of sloppy shit, and you get these scientists, you know, they're very refined in their thinking and they've done all these experiments and they've got a lot of terminology and a lot of theory behind them, and they say, well, that's pseudoscience. You know, that's not real science. You know, again, negating doesn't really serve any of us. It's what's coming at you might be a distal truth that you can't grasp because you're more proximally oriented, right? So what we're seeing in distal awareness or openness, just being, is a type of no breaks, no holds barred, no need to fight. It's being. And that idea that we have everything at our fingertips, right? Literally, like the most distal part of ourselves when we're open is infinity or everything. I think I've softened out so much right here now that I've kind of lost my train of thought. Yeah, okay, let me put it to you another way. The people that say this is pseudoscience, okay, what they need to realize, and this is really, really like a key element in the struggle that we're all having, right? Science, in that working, in that fighting, in that twisting type of maneuver that it continually obsesses itself with, is actually pseudo-mysticism. I'll say that again. Science is pseudo-mysticism. So the mysticism, the openness, the everythingness, right? The being okay with not knowing, you know, whether the earth is flat or round, or the everythingness, the vastness, the spaciousness, the mystical, the woo-woo, you know, the joy, the whatever you want to call it, is there for all of us. It's there, right? And science keeps trying to say, well, you know, we need to break through these barriers that we're having these issues with. Well, if you look at yourself as science and you are the driver, and you are the, you know, you receive that regenerative counter-twisting or untwisting or whatever, and you're in this struggle. I mean, fucking knock yourself out with that shit. The thing is when you're beating your head against the wall continually, day after day after day, and you have the inertia of being stuck in your confinement, and I'm like, bang, I need to figure this out, bang, I need to figure this out. So I'm beating my fucking head against the wall several fucking times a minute, day after day after day after day, trying to figure shit out. And then there comes a point where when you stop beating your head against the fucking wall, it feels good, right? Like, hold it a second. I've been beating my head against the wall for my entire life trying to figure shit out. Where has it gotten me? With more questions, a vaster knowledge base of the, you know, the intricacies of the universe, and holy shit, now we need to know all this other stuff because we figured this out, but that leads to all these other questions. So stop, every once in a while, just stop beating your fucking head against the wall and say, oh, hold it a second. I'm everything. And I guarantee you, that feels really, really good. Like, it's awesome to just say, you know what? I'm going to stop beating my fucking head against the wall on all of this shit because I'm not getting anywhere with it. I'm going to stop chasing my tail. And I'm just going to be. Right? I wanted to start this video out with me in the hammock back here. And we were running into like 7:35, 7:36, and we hadn't got everything set up, so we just jumped right into the talk with me in front of the cameras. But what I'm going to do to finish the talk is I'm going to take these two guys and just back up here into the hammock. I don't know if you guys will be able to see this or not. It might only get captured on a couple of things here, but how are we doing on time, Chief? 9?
I think an hour and a half in.
Okay. So I'm just going to go jump in the hammock for a second, and maybe you'll see it on these videos, maybe you'll see it on, Steve will handle things a little bit. But now, right? Just swinging. The reason that babies love being rocked is it's the eternal recurrence. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. No ego state, small bucket, basic baby. You're indivisible, almost pure indivisible, right? And I'm just being. This is just like, I can't tell you how wonderful this feels to just say, okay, I'm not going to be kneeling anymore in front of these computer screens. I'm not going to be, hammering out all of this detail shit. I'm just sitting here now swinging. Back and forth, back and forth. So, take some time to just fucking hang out. It's about I would say 1,000 times more worth it than beating your head against the wall continually, right? You have everything you need within yourself. You just need to reorganize, repackage some of your ego states, some of your individual confinement to open. And when you open, and when you recognize that you're open and that you're everything, shit smooths out. You're not beating your head against the wall continually. I'm going to hop back out of the hammock here now. And we'll see if there's some questions we can answer. If there's any really fucking hard questions, I'll tell you to fuck off. But if there's fun questions or curious questions, I'm just kidding. You can ask me whatever you want. But I'll see what I can do with you guys. Let's see, Steve, if we can pull up. I don't know if there's a nice way to end your session. Yeah. Good night, Mark, Bradley, and friends. Yeah. Thanks, guys. That's Carmen saying hello. My sweet cousin Carmen. I don't see any questions coming up in the Zoom. I'm going to try to open the chat to see if anything's got pumped in there. Nothing? Randy, you're the only guy with me on the Zoom from what I can tell. If I fucked up and I didn't admit anybody from the waiting room, I'm sorry. But
I didn't see anything.
Yeah, you didn't see anybody else show up?
No.
Okay,
And
well, cool.
disengage that waiting room.
I think I set it up to be just wide open on the last Zoom, and I maybe missed doing that on this one, but that's okay. Yeah, there's probably a way to scroll through this Facebook Live stuff. Watching. Ahoy, brother. Hey, Rochelle. Rebecca Miller's watching. Lori Miller's watching. AKA freeze mode. Yeah. The inertia or the freeze or these trauma responses we have, this whole picture of what you're doing with your trauma. If you're uncoiling it and relaxing it, taking it for a range of motion and kind of like moving it around and loosening it up, it's going to get easier to handle. And that's what I've been doing with YouTube for the last 8 months, you know, doing all of these YouTubes on my plurality, is just talking about it and saying, hey, here I am. I've got this plurality. I'm trying to figure it out. And it seems applicable to a lot of stuff that I've been thinking about for years, like non-duality and everything. And I've, you know, in these last couple of sessions, put this together for you guys. But I don't want to generalize here. But what I see a lot of our political problems being is really that there are people who look at a threat in their environment and they want to fight, right? And then there are other people who freeze or flight or fawn, right? So you try to make friends with the threat, you're fawning on it, or you're fighting the threat, or you're freezing, you're not sure what to do with the threat, or you're fleeing, taking off. So, you know, like I say, generalizing to say that, you know, certain political parties are more fight-oriented and certain are more freeze or more fawn-oriented would take us a certain distance. But how you handle your trauma, if you're really getting good at looking at your trauma and looking at how this confines you, right, how it binds you, and this stuff, remember, indestructible, right? Once you get acquainted with this, your trauma is, like, I consider all my trauma, all my life issues, to be mostly just seasoning. Like, scars build character. So now that I've manipulated this enough and played with it enough, I'm comfortable saying, yeah, I've got all of this trauma, I've got these vulnerabilities. Like, I need people, right? And to say that is a weird thing, right? Because, you know, you're an adult, you should be self-sufficient, you should have this, you should have that. Well, no, I'm actually a 2-month-old and a 4-month-old and a 4-year-old at my littlest levels. And they like want nourishment and feel abandoned, and, you know, there's this void that I'm dealing with continually. And I don't mind that the void is there. I'm just trying to figure out, well, how do I fill it? And to fill the void, or to manage your gaps, your sections that aren't really like working, is to say to yourself, there's weak spots, weak links in my chain, right? And to deal with those weaknesses or those vulnerabilities in your patterns, and to say, how do I beef this up? How do I make this better? When I do that, and I'm recognizing these incredible weaknesses, this incredible neediness that I have in certain spots, I'm making my chain stronger. So to me, being vulnerable and recognizing your weaknesses is the ultimate fix for a deficiency in strength. If we keep traumatizing each other and nothing gets done about it, or very little gets done about it, we're going to be continually weak. You know, stick this in here, jam this down in here, right beside it, and now your individual is compressing your indivisible. Good night. You're done, right? And the downward spiral we're all experiencing, this big fucking like scary shitstorm we're in, it's because we got too much of this going on. Work out your trauma, manage your ego states in a different pattern. Out comes your indivisible, which is indestructible, which gives you a fair bit of grace and ability to breathe and that equanimity, and you swing out for a while and you're floating and you're relaxed and you're experiencing that recurrence, and you're saying, hey man, life's pretty good, this isn't so bad. And with that spaciousness, you're going to find yourself managing things differently. We're going to open to the 21st century. We're going to open to our possibilities. There's a lot that's been said about feminine, masculine. I'm balancing a lot of feminine energy, more than I knew I had, and I love it. I don't want to sound like any kind of like expert, but you know, I've been drawn to women my whole life because, you know, my father abandoned me when I was still a fetus, right? Basically said no. So my mother was left with very little choice but to give me up for adoption. So, which would have been fine if I wouldn't have had any medical problems and would have gone into an adoption, you know, fairly quickly within a few weeks or a month or so. But I also had some medical problems which kept me in the hospital for a couple months, which extended me into a medical foster care situation. And then finally I was adopted at 8 months of age. And super lucky, super lucky that I was adopted. You know, if you guys can find it somehow within yourselves to go out and adopt a kid, you know, that would be really cool. I may do it at some point. My life has kind of like been so out of control at times and so destabilized that I, you know, thought, well, I'll just never be the kind of guy who could really handle a kid. Or maybe a kid would stabilize me, and maybe I'd be sort of better adapted to a domestic lifestyle. But the truth is, there's just parts of me that don't domesticate. You know, I'm a little wild. I'm a little fucking crazy in certain ways. But yeah, there are these little people out there. There's babies in all of us that are not being nurtured, that are not being cared for, and we can care for ourselves differently and find that ease, that indivisible. This getting all jammed up with ego states and disease and stress and turmoil and beating your head against the wall confines your indivisible. Getting more into your child state, your ease, takes care of disease. If that makes sense. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there, guys. Love that you came out. You guys, really appreciate that you're here with us for these talks. And I'll do another one in a week or two. With Steve here, with South Florida Video Productions helping me out on some of this stuff. I really feel like I'm able to sort of let my creative flow, where I'm not so bound up with the technological aspects, so worrying about, you know, what the camera angles are working and what isn't. So yeah, like I need Steve, right? Or I need production assistants. I need all of you guys. Like we're all pure and perfect. Just the way we are, right? There isn't anybody out there who's deficient. We all have this inside of ourselves. There's no need to negate each other. There's no need to invalidate each other. There's distal truth, proximal truth. The eternal recurrence takes us wherever we want to go if we balance it. Love you guys. I'm going to shut everything down here. I'm not sure in which order, but just seeing, I don't think I have anything else to answer to, so I'm going to let you guys go. Thanks so much. Thanks, Randy. Nice to have you along. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.